Grief is not the end of your story, it's the beginning of a new chapter. Welcome back to the Empower Grief Journey podcast. I'm your host, Chris Mamone, and I'm the founder of the Empower Grief Journey coaching and podcast platform. Each episode brings real conversations with people from around the world who have navigated grief and discovered the strength to create new inspired beginnings. You'll discover how to walk from loss to empowerment through powerful storytelling that will guide you towards a fulfilled future of courage and hope. Today, we have an amazing guest. His name is Samuel Thomas Holland. He's a clairvoyant medium intuitive who can channel frequencies, vibrations, and multidimensional portal timelines to address and analyze the energetic relationship between the physical and spiritual evolution and developments. Today, he shares a powerful story about grief over losing his friend Jordan, who committed suicide in 2019. And I'm excited to talk to Samuel today because, as you guys know on this podcast, I am very, very open to everyone's walk of life through grief, whether that's spirituality and very many facets that we've talked about on the show throughout this year. And so I'm really excited to learn more about Samuel, as you guys will today, and also learn how he walked through his grief journey and also how he learned how to heal. And so, without further ado, Samuel, welcome to the podcast.
Good morning, Chris. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, likewise. It's been a couple months since we connected.
Yes.
But I wanted to give you an opportunity to share with listeners a little bit of the story of your friend Jordan, because I know you shared that with me when we first met, but I'd love for listeners to hear it firsthand from you.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, myself being an opera singer and Jordan, she was an aspiring opera singer from Sydney as well, but she'd moved down to Melbourne to pursue her career and also her tutelage, education, whatever you will. And in doing so, she was studying at the Victorian University at the time. And of course, COVID struck, and she had multiple engagements, a few of them, if I recall, being overseas in Germany, Paris, and I think one even in Beirut, if I recall. Yeah. And all of those, of course, fell through due to the lockdowns, that the heavy lockdowns we had in Melbourne, Australia. And in that regard, also, then she became incredibly more. There was a black tar of depression that then started to creep into her, as I would say it more, because depression, I think, is too much of a lax of a word to compare to what she was going through. It was this black tar, like her lungs were being engulfed with, her heart felt like there was no way of going on. Her brain kept saying, "What's the point?" And of course, at the end of the day, it was a spiritual contract for her to move on and help people from the other side. I kept hearing from her that even though she has helped many from the fifth dimension of where we go and we pass on into spirit, it's it's still the grief. Her grief accidentally became my own, but I'll get onto that in a few seconds. Because when she found the courage to hang herself, it was very sudden, of course, and it was very abrupt. And unfortunately, her roommate Shikara found her hanging from the bedroom rafters, and that unfortunately caused a lot of trauma for Shikara's lessons, of course, as well. And in that regard, I hope she finds the help for more than grief, but also the trauma of finding someone hanging in front of you is a life lesson that also needs to be rectified within itself. But at the same time, there was that acceptance through spiritual contract that she would find her in that regard. And after that, of course, multiple friends, multiple colleagues. There was a announcement on all social media platforms of where uh, where she performed, where she studied, and of course it was with sad hearts. And of course, they did not mention how she departed, but it was pretty much understood that it was suicide. And of course, she was only 24 when she departed, and it was quite interesting that after she did, I was being told left, right, and centre because I was coming into my own energetic awakening, spiritual awakening, so to speak, because of the of what of coming into a new version of myself. I now remember seeing from doing all the observation that I can now through hypnosis that I do, and also then Reiki healing. Also, when you're in such a powerful high vibration, you can see the high perspective stepping forward for you, even when you are healing your chakra points, meridians, and also repairing any tears or rips in your auric field. A lot of information comes to you without you even realizing, and that's helped me understand Jordan's path and departure even more so. But before I learned how to do Reiki or hypnosis, I was, of course, going down my spiritual awakening, energetic awakening, as I now call it. Uh, and in doing so, I did not realize that when I invited Jordan in through the portal of coming in for her to say, well, yes, Sam, you are a medium, and yes, you can talk to spirit, I was unconsciously and empathetically inviting her in with all her earthbound issues at the same time of what she felt before she departed. And that I was doing security guard work at the Department of Justice at the time. And each day I came into work, I felt like throwing up. When my boss asked me how I was feeling, I said I felt like I wanted to slit my wrists. I felt like I wanted to commit suicide or lash out at someone and then kill myself. And then, of course, that black tar started to form, which was the announcement that something definitely had to shift, because this was definitely not me. This was a lesson that Jordan had brought on to teach me how to transmute spiritual energy that I now see in hindsight. But at the same time, she still works with me now through more the appropriate channels of the fifth dimension, instead of coming so close as she did in the beginning. But that, of course, was a lesson in both grief and also the lesson of don't let spirit get too close, because you are empathetically a magnet to earthbound energies if you do. And then you have to make sure that you do then cleanse yourself and perform what's the word transmute the energy of what the spirit has brought forward, if it is earthbound qualities to it, which many spirits do that are confused. And of course, those who have committed suicide also house that energy if they're still getting too close. That's why I had to learn also the boundary techniques of then communicating with spirit, which of course comes with evolution and development. And that was a huge blessing that I can now say I was taught by a friend, and that was her sort of not departure blessing, but at the same time a blessing in dealing with spirit or suicide that regularly seemed to come to me, because I then found out, because of this past life interactions with Jordan and myself came forward, where I had done the same deed to teach her lessons in the past when she was my husband in a past life, and thus for she's now teaching me the same similar lessons in this lifetime. But I'm a bit more, I can attune into it more spiritually than she could, and then of course that's another that's another portal to go down in another day. But to simplify it, she was my husband, I was her wife in another lifetime of pagan era, and I'd committed suicide because our child had died of SIDS, and I could not bear going on without my child in the world. But I was also teaching her how to survive without me as well at the same time, just as much as Jordan is this time. Basically, there's that spiritual contract and agreement that she's given to multiple people, just as much as me, of going, even though I'm gone, I'm still with you. There's no true departure. There's no true separation. Of course, yeah.
That's a beautiful story that you just shared with us on the spiritual side of things because I've walked through grief in many ways and I've heard people not believe in an afterlife and there's people like me that do believe in it, obviously yourself. And I wanted to ask you, what can you share with people that maybe don't believe in that so far on the spirituality side? What was be some advice you can encourage them with? Because when we go through grief, and this is the reason I'm asking this, is I found in a lot of ways that when my grandfather passed away and when my son passed away, they came through in a dream for me 30 days after they departed. And I became a believer in many ways through that spiritual experience. But what would you say to people that struggle to believe in the afterlife?
The first word that comes to mind is control. They're trying to control something that they need to surrender to. Yeah.
Mm.
And of course, that's hard when the heavy emotions of grief are in the mix. But of course, there is always what you just said with your grandfather and your son um, stepping forward in a dream. That's usually the biggest sign of spirit stepping forward for most people. If you're not working in the spiritual field, such as myself and you to a degree as well, it's it's of course a lot harder to register that. But at the same time, yeah, I feel that even psychology can bring us closer to them because that helps us speak our truth more and find the compassion through the pain, find the forgiveness for self through the grief. Yeah.
I
And
think
I think
I think
that's
you
why, yeah.
I
And I
think
think
you
that's
brought up
why.
a Oh, sorry,
Sorry, go
our
ahead. Yeah.
audio's getting mixed. No, I had a big question for you because you brought up earlier, you've talked a lot about lessons through this experience with Jordan, that she in many ways is teaching you certain lessons through this soul contract. And I think that that's a very powerful thing to say in an experience like this, where you do lose somebody close to you to suicide and realizing that there's lessons to be learned from that experience. Elaborate a little bit about that on the lesson side of things, because I do think in many ways grief is our biggest teacher. It is something that shares with us parts of life that we may not have experienced or may not become aware of had we not gone through an experience like that.
Definitely. And immediately when you say that, I'm reminded of what my spiritual guide Celeste always brings up, and even Jordan herself in the past, and others, is the catch up process. That yes, because we are on planet Earth, it's not as fast and as quick as it is in the fifth dimension where things happen immediately. And and of course, with that being said, the catch up process that they're referring to is, of course, always having to slow down, and I use the word surrender again to the process, and then at the same time, see that's when you can see the lesson through the silence. Because in grief, there is so much chaos, and in silence, that's where we can find our clarity. And if you were wise enough to observe silence through grief, and emotional disturbance and disharmony, that's where you start to get the golden nuggets of the lessons that are stepping forward. And it doesn't happen immediately, of course, and I think that's why they always say catch up process is necessary, because of course we have such more density being physical, also having a spiritual experience down here on planet Earth. So it's an interesting concept that we have to sort of wait for the well, as we say, divine timing is crucial. That's the understanding of the catch up process. I believe, as before you know it, and I can attest to this. Before I've known it, the clarity has come to me from a question I've asked, or from the pain and emotion that sort of makes me red hot, and then having to then silence myself enough to observe what's actually going on beneath that erupting surface. Yeah, and when I did, of course, that whisper of clarity steps forward. But of course, when we're in that emotional state, of course, as you know yourself, it's harder to harness that clarity completely. We can go, oh, okay, I see that for what it is, but I still want to have my tantrum moment here, sort of thing at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah. I love what you said about grief being very chaotic because I do feel like when we go through grief, I hear people a lot of times say it's a negative emotion and it's something that doesn't bring a lot of light to ourselves, but I see it in an opposite way. I think it brings out a lot of emotions within ourselves that we may not have faced yet, or we may not have given ourselves an opportunity to process. And I also think that grief is making us question our identity. They're making it question parts of ourselves that maybe no longer work going forward. And so we have to leave them behind. And we have to step forward more into our alignment or our purpose. And so I found a lot of truth in what you said about learning lessons through grief because I really do think that's that. And that's not to say, by the way, that when you're going through grief, you're just going to say, okay, well, I figured out my lesson and I'm fine. It doesn't work out like that. You're going to go through all the emotions. You're going to go through all the turmoil. You're going to go through the chaos. And eventually, on your own timing, as you said, divine timing, we do see those lessons and we look back and see that maybe this thing didn't happen in a bad way for us, but it really happened for us to give us that shift we needed for this next phase of our life.
Exactly. And I think what you just explained even described the catch up process in a nutshell just as much, of having to wait before true clarity comes to you sometimes. But at the same time, I want to add that uh, in observation, when I was observing coming into new versions of myself, I was seeing others who Jordan's death had touched, going into fields such as psychology training at university, where they had been this prolific solo opera singer for years, and had sent them on a different trajectory of new version of self in psychology. And that was an obvious observation of, well, she definitely brought this forward, and it had that frequency and energy of that entirely. Um, and also, it's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting how observing her other friends who have also moved overseas, become new versions of themselves, still usher in still the victimhood of losing her, to a degree. And it's understandable completely, but at the same time, I always ask Jordan, when will they come to terms with your departure? And her response has always been, when they have a child
Interesting.
and they see a different observation to the world.
I think that's very powerful to talk about
Mm,
grief and what you just shared, by the way, about perspective, because I do
mm,
feel like in many ways, when we live our life and grief comes along, it's almost like if you were driving a car at, 100 miles an hour and you slam on the brakes in that moment and you just get thrown into the front of the car. Grief happens like that because I think we run on autopilot so much that our perspective and our worldview is becomes something we're very comfortable with, we're familiar with. It's not something that we expect a lot of surprise or a lot of upset or turmoil to happen. And so when grief does, it really upsets that comfortable world we built. Now we're in a very uncertain place. And I love that you said that that Jordan told them that they would see a new perspective when they had a child, because I do feel like when you see life on the other spectrum like that, it does shift your perspective a bit about what things mean to you, what kind of purpose those moments have in our life. And you may not always see something negatively or down like you normally would. You might see it as something that gave you a gift in that moment.
Definitely. And I think, uh, um, and as I've known and researched in the past, children always have more of that spiritual awareness when they're younger. And I guess what Jordan was bringing forward with that statement was also the child will help the grief become less impactful to a degree, and um, vanish the victimhood from that friend or friends that keep posting such things on social media each year of her birthday or her departure. Um, I have a feeling that the child will bring forward a new narrative or a new frequency to see that for what it truthfully was meant to be, instead of the violence to self that um, the victimhood keeps presenting in that person. They
How did
find the
your
yeah. Go
how
ahead.
did your grief with Jordan, how did she help you heal from a spiritual standpoint? Because you were able to connect with that other side, being a clairvoyant medium. What ways did she help you go
Mm.
through that grief process that you went through?
I think the whole part, because as I stated, I think the whole past life explanations helped a lot of seeing yet again the lessons of what I brought for her through my departure in that lifetime with the same was the same grief that I was giving was feeling for her at the same time, and that really then made a lot of sense to me, uh, as I had already tapped into past life recognition quite easily, and that was a helpful tool that then Jordan used in spirit to help progress, and dare I say, yeah, transmute the grief process that much more easily. And because I could understand it through that narrative, it was that much more vital that she did so.
When you
To
bring
say
up
this is yeah.
transmuting, when you say transmuting the grief process, what do you see that as for people, or even on your own journey? What did transmuting that grief look like for you?
It was more, I guess, around the lines of releasing the tension around my heart and lungs in a very somatic way and a very energy healing way. And I guess because of my Reiki healing um, lineage and adaptation through attunement, it's it was made that much more easier than most, I suppose. Where I guess the for others it would still remain quite heavy on the heart and the lungs where grief hits the most. And I'm hearing even in the liver because of the stress of um, having to come to terms with what's going on, and also the stomach region for digestion issues at the same time. But for me, it was more in the heart and the lungs, because I'd always feel my heart dropping into my lungs whenever she'd step forward in the first stages of the process, and healing that was the main issue. And I know that that's where a lot of people in grief sit, who I've talked to about grief in the past. At the same time, they always say my heart drops into my lungs and I can't breathe properly. There've been statements that people have used in the past, both clients and just people who I've talked to online in Facebook forums, or even just naturally if the topic of suicide or grief has come up naturally. Yeah.
I think that's a powerful statement because I've certainly experienced that myself, where it's that feeling you described of just having your heart sink, your breathing feels tight. I thought it was interesting you brought up the gut issues, the stomach issues, digestion. That's something I definitely have struggled with through my grief process. And I wanted to ask you too, because a lot of people in society think grief has a timeline in many ways, and I always like to show that there is no set time frame in which you're going to go through grief or move forward from it. But I wanted to ask you, was there a point in your healing journey after losing Jordan that you kind of felt like you'd stepped into this new frequency or this new version of yourself?
Definitely. And I think I was being shown this in a sort of past vision uh, of a Facebook communication that I'd been talking about, and remembering lately, I guess because of this podcast coming up today. Um, and it was due to me helping out a mother with her daughter who committed suicide as well, and yeah, there was another mother, of course, who had lost a parent, and she then lost a child. Sorry, and she got a bit defensive of a comment that I made in complete and utter compassionate transparency, and basically had a bit of a go at me of saying, "Oh, if you have not lost a child, then get off this forum." And I said, "Well,
Mm.
excuse me. I lost a dear friend to me to suicide, so I think I've got just as much of a right to give someone credence and consolence who's going through a hard time just as much as yourself. So I forgive you, but please don't think that I'm being nasty or um, pessimistic here, or um, not caring for this person's well-being at the same time." Um, as I said, I know that there is not really a timeline for this, but at the same time, as you even just said, Chris, there is a new version of yourself that you do step into, and I feel that I have stepped into that after that um, purging and transmutation of that black tar that was definitely on my lungs. That was more of the earthbound, and dare I say it, I think the more we understand what the earthbound energy is around suicide and death, exactly of why it causes grief and all the issues that it does, and all the issues that come from grief, is that much more paramount, because it's always swept under the rug of going, "Oh, there, take all the time you need." Well, half the time you need to talk about it, half the time you need to speak your truth, half the time you need to F bomb the world with shits and Fs up the wazoo, basically, I found. Um, but of course, you're left in silence because everyone finds it too, well, I wouldn't say everyone, but because that's a gross generalization, but many find it too difficult to step forward to the plate and hear your truth on the matter, because they have their own 10 cents worth on the matter itself, and they go, "Well, if you don't believe that Jesus Christ is your savior, then I can't help you," sort of thing, has been a statement that I've heard from many people along the lines of grief. And I'm going, well, okay, that doesn't make sense, but okay, it makes sense in your opinion. And yeah, there is a new version of myself, and I know that there's a new version of everyone's self that steps forward after grief, because the more the more we see the lessons, the more we understand through observation, is what's stepping forward. Yeah.
I think that's a beautiful perspective about observation because we do very much as humans, we live in especially in today's world, we're very reactive. We're very like right in front of whatever's in front of us, and we want things very quick, very fast. And I have learned through my own spiritual journey that we can't rush spiritual lessons. We can't rush them. We can't force them, and we can't make them happen. We also can't avoid them. And I should say we can't avoid them very long because they will show up in different ways. So I love your idea of being the observer in your life. I think that's a very powerful, powerful tool that's overlooked because we oftentimes go through grief and have this why me attitude or why did I have to go through this? And it elicits blame on ourselves, like there's something wrong with us. When in reality, this thing really did happen for us. It happened for a purpose, it happened for a reason. It gave us something that we needed to learn or shed in a lot of ways. For example, we're in a 9 year astrology, just meaning completion. So we're shedding things that no longer belong to us, belief systems, ideologies, parts of ourselves that no longer serve, to make way for next year for us to start a new year fresh from the beginning, astrologically, and just giving ourselves an opportunity to maximize on the lessons we've learned this year so we can create success in our future. And I think that grief, in many ways, I see it as a shedding event in a lot of ways, not to be insensitive in any way, but to say that when we do lose that person that meant so much to us, yes, we have all the heavy emotions and our life has changed, but it doesn't always have to be for nothing. It doesn't have to be just a bad experience that happened to you. And I think that when we can find purpose and meaning through our grief, and we're able to see that there's ways for us to honor and celebrate this person we cared so much about in our life, we're able to carry grief forward with us with intention. And it's actually something that helps us and doesn't hurt us.
Definitely. And through all of that, um, that's what I've loved bringing into the equation of hypnotherapy, actually. Finding the compassion, finding the forgiveness of self, finding all the observations, and then also finding the transformation of what we've been talking about today of the new version of self. And the way I deliver hypnotherapy is bringing people into their spiritual house and finding their loved one, to find that communication that I had with Jordan, to then put the pieces together, and then if they still don't understand, help them understand through physical explanations. If the spiritual ones are too convoluted, so to speak, as I have found with clients in the past, but thankfully I've been able to, they've understood it to degrees, and that's also why I offer um, accountability sessions afterwards as well, to make sure you're on the right path with everything, and so that you don't feel so alone in the process afterwards, even though I make sure that the energies, frequencies, and vibrations of their departed loved one step forward more in an anchored process, so that they feel more having a long distance relationship more than the grief that was there. That there's a reconnection, a rekindling, finding what was lost, so to speak.
And what's been
It's
your
been profound.
experience? It sounds like you found this gift of mediumship through that loss with Jordan. It really came to the surface for you in that moment. What has it been like for you to work with people in that space? Have you, for example, when you work with somebody who maybe isn't as spiritually open as you or I, what's it like working with them? And what's it like working with people who are very open spiritually? What kind of receptions do you get from the work that you provide to them or the connection you provide to their loved one?
Yeah, definitely. I've found different outcomes for sure, but always powerful ones. Um, and most of the time, it's usually it's usually one spirit more than many that want to step forward. Because I've had grandparents that have wanted to step forward with the message more than the actual parent themselves that the client has wanted in the past. Um, and but thankfully the grandparent has had the information to alleviate and answer the questions that the client has wanted to know, even though then they go, oh, I still wish I could have spoken to my father. I said, well, Dad didn't want to step forward today. It was more Grandma who had the floor really. And so I think that also helps more with the personal approach with and what I find as well, being the practitioner, um, helping someone step into their subconscious mind to find who they're looking for more at the same time. If they don't want to talk to me, they're going to they're going to have more of a personal approach for you, and you're going to actually see them compared to me seeing them, but at the same time saying sometimes, as I said, oh, they're not really wanting to step forward all that much. This other spirit's wanting to step forward more, and I find that that has sort of left people feeling a bit, oh, I didn't get exactly what I wanted, sort of conclusion to the session sometimes, and you, as a boundary, you've just got to say, okay, whatever happened has happened. At least they've gotten the answers to their questions, and of course, I always know down the road, probably 2 or 3 days later, that spirit will probably touch them on the shoulder anyway and deliver a message through either radio, TV, or social medias without them really realizing it. But if they're observant enough, they will. And I always know that there's that because of the higher frequencies that we're always in a session like that to bring forward through the portal that I open to allow that spirit to come in and then also close it up so that I'm not walking around going, "Oh, hey, hey, Nina's father." It's yeah. So that's what really, and I always find that there's a lot more power with this spirit house hypnotherapy, as I call it, because it's very niche and it's also very unique to what I do in life in general, being an opera singer as well, with the frequencies that come from that, and that have also helped cleanse so much and more than I realize at the same time. I feel sometimes, even though I can hear it and observe it, it's sometimes an unknown when I'm performing. Um, but at the same time, that hypnotherapy has the same effect, I found, because as I've been in with clients who have had the same reaction of waterfall tears streaming down their face in a session, and just keep hearing allow it to happen there, because I've always, when you're a practitioner of that in that sort of field, it's almost like grief. Well, it's the same reaction of grief, seeing someone tear up that much with glistening tears rolling down their cheeks. And I just kept hearing in those various sessions that it's a cleanse and just allow it to happen, but your heart still falls into your chest for that client, and you just have to go, okay, yeah, allow this to happen, or just remain silent and tell them to breathe out in through the nose, out through the mouth, with the breathwork technique that I've learnt along the way at the same time, so that they feel that much more at home and acknowledging in their subconscious mind that everything's all right, even though they are in a nervous system reaction of grief at the same time, um, going through this because of the cleanse necessary of what the spirit is brought up in the lesson and in the communication. Yeah.
I think that, that's a powerful thing to bring up about medium readings because I've done two of them this year. And I've learned that going into them with a very open mind, not to expect a lot of things from it, but just show up and be very present, be very open. I've gotten a lot out of those communications that I didn't even have the thoughts for, to be honest with you. I didn't even know what to ask in certain ways, and I was very shocked at the answers that came through because I was kind of laughing inside, going, well, I thought about that a while ago, and it's nice to get the answer today. But you also sometimes get, I always try to say, sometimes you don't get what you want, but you get what you need from it, is what I've caught on
Exactly.
to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes I also hear the words. I can explain it to you, but I can't understand it for you. The understanding comes later,
That's
and I found
powerful.
that quite profound. Yeah, yeah.
That's that's very profound in a lot of ways. If you can explain something, but understand it's a different aspect to
Mm.
that. So, well, Samuel,
But yeah, yeah,
oh. Sorry, go
Sorry,
ahead.
yeah, uh, yeah, no, go ahead. I've lost that train of thought as soon as you.
No, I thought that was really interesting to explain because I've come to find on my own spiritual journey, for example, there's things you can't really understand sometimes, but it gets explained later, or vice versa. I've had it happen. Um, my son, for example, he always leaves me lions in the most random places, and I don't ever look for it, but it happens. And so I always try to sit there sometimes and say that if you're always looking for something, it may not always show itself, but if you just allow spirit to communicate with you in the way that it does, you'll know at that point. And when you know when to look for certain signs, for example, I had one happen recently. You'll love this. I was having a really bad day for whatever reason, and I went out to a retail store that sells, Christmas stuff and this and that, and children toys. They had a section of that. I was in line checking out, and I went to leave, and I just like glanced up from the cash register, and there was a lion with his paw stuck out like this and a big like kind of face. And I was laughing because I didn't expect it, but I just kind of laughed in the back of my head, and I was going, "That's my son coming through saying, 'Lighten up, man. It's okay to have a bad day, but lighten up.'"
Yeah,
So, so I just think spirit communicates with us in these very subtle ways, and it's important for us to slow down enough to be mindful of that and be aware of it, and just be open to it. Not lead it with a lot of expectation.
definitely. Yeah, and I keep hearing spirit always exceeds our expectations just as much as well because um, what we think might occur is usually completely different to what actually does half the time. Yeah.
I could not agree more with you, my friend. Well, Samuel, this has been an amazing time getting to talk to you today on the podcast. I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your openness with your spirituality journey and how that has impacted your grief journey. Because I know that grief is something very heavy that we all experience in life, and all of us experience grief in a very different way from everybody else. And I love that Jordan has not only given you so many lessons, but also opened the door to this gift for you, and that you've been able to help other people through that. And I see so much as it's a very hard way that you lost Jordan, I just can't help but see that she gave you such a gift, and she still walks this path with you just in a very different way.
Definitely. And I just want to uh, li- leave today with what she shared when I was in Berlin. Actually, having a amazing Berlin beer and opening up the portal of alcohol, of course, at the same time, but it's still a very spiritual portal. And it was one of the most clearest times I've ever seen her with the utmost clarity in Berlin in 2023. And she said, "I'm so glad I'm here with you, Samuel, because I can share this experience with you on a much more both visceral but also energetic level because I am now helping more people as a spirit guide to them without them knowing it, even just with people across the park from where you are in the beer cafe now as well. I am one of their spirit guides without them acknowledging it, but they know spiritually, but don't know physically, of course, that I have agreed to guide them in life. So being with you and then being with the many at the same time, guiding their path, is such a powerful experience. And I just wanted to end the session there with just sharing how powerful our people who we loved in the physical and who are now in the spirit are usually probably guiding many without them knowing it,
That,
without them
that's an
even knowing their
incredible
names.
story.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Samuel, I
And I
appreciate
thought
you
that was just
sharing that.
very, yeah, very, very powerful. And I always mention that to people who ask about spirit guides and saying, well, usually they're probably our past loved ones anyway, that we just have forgotten because of the spiritual amnesia that we have to come here, yeah, onto planet Earth.
That that's such a beautiful story, and I can't imagine how powerful that moment actually was for you to be able to connect with her in that capacity. And I think that's what I've found on the spiritual journey that I've been on is when you leave yourself open to that, and like I said, without expectation, but just being present in that moment and welcoming that to present itself to you. I think that's such a beautiful gift. I appreciate you sharing that with us today.
Yeah, because I'm just wondering how many people your grandfather or even your son are guiding more than we know now at the same time as well. So that's just another privilege to acknowledge that they're probably guiding more people than we know, just as much on both multidimensional and earthbound planet Earth journeys, just as much as more than we know. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Samuel, I just want to say again, thank you so much for being on the podcast today and sharing your story about Jordan. And I just want to say I wish you the best in all your endeavors going forward because I think Jordan gave you such a powerful gift to go help more people on your time on Earth that you have left. I think you have a powerful gift, my friend. And I just wanted to say a big thank you to sharing that with our listeners today, and sharing it with me. I've been very grateful to have connected with you this year.
You too, Chris. Thank you for having me on.
And I want to thank all of our listeners for joining Samuel and I today on this episode of the Empowered Grief Journey podcast. If this episode resonates with you, please share it with somebody you know who could benefit from Samuel's story. For more episodes that are designed to empower you and support you, visit empoweredgriefjourney.com and subscribe to this podcast. You can find us on Apple and Podbean. The Empowered Grief Journey is all about honoring your journey, embracing your emotions, and finding strength in your own time. I want you to know that you're never alone on this journey, and together we can navigate grief with courage and compassion. Until next time, be kind to yourself and take your grief journey one step at a time.